About 2 months ago, before my husband left for Japan, we went to Half Price Books, where he picked out a few books for me to read, kind of as a my husband chooses my TBR sort of challenge. I finally have gotten around to reading all of those books, and I'm here to talk about them today. Up first, if you watched my reading recap from August, you're gonna know that the last book that I read in August was a book called Fear Thy Neighbor by Fern Michaels. Right here, it is a thriller of sorts, not super intense like the thrillers that I normally would read, but it follows three kind of main characters, Allison, Renee, and Valentina. Allison is for sure the main character. She's 29 years old, nomadic in nature. She grew up in foster care in Ohio, and when she graduates from high school, she kind of drifts from town to town throughout Florida, knowing that once she finds the place that's going to be the place that she stays forever, she will know. She stumbles her way through this place called Palmetto Island on her way to the Keys and kind of decides that this is her place. It's a small island community. They're very close-knit, and the community does seem to have everything that Allison needs. She kind of stumbles upon, while perusing the local paper, this house that seems too good to be true. It's a cottage on the beach. She's like, if the price is right, that's going to be the house that I live in, and the price is miraculously low. So she ends up buying this house in cash, and at first it kind of starts out with, you know, it's everything that she wanted it to be. But then as the days turn into weeks, we kind of notice that there's a darker side to this peaceful haven of an island, and the locals kind of all share a secret, and Allie kind of discovers that she has a choice. She can stay and join them, or she can escape the island. So that's kind of paraphrased with what Goodreads describes this book as. And I don't really think that that's how it goes, because to me, the book is slow. I was about 30% in before anything started happening, and this is a small book. It's less than 300 pages. So about 30% in before anything really started to happen, and then by 75%, I was like, I don't know how this is even gonna conclude. It was very, very confusing. The main character, Allie, has had an incredibly hard life, and the way that she talks is just not believable to me. I feel like she would have cursed a lot more. There's no profanity in this book, like at all. She does have a line, "I'll blow your freaking head off," and that just doesn't have the same impact, I think, as if she were to have thrown in a few swears in there. Dialogue, pretty weird in the whole book. Characters are sort of one-dimensional. I really didn't care about anybody in it. I've never been so happy to finish a book, and that's okay. Thriller, like I said before, not really that thrilling. Didn't have a good time reading on this. I think that the author could have focused on the found family aspect of this, given that Allie grew up in foster care and didn't have a family, but she didn't. We have a classic case of, here's a love interest for absolutely no reason. Again, like I said, instead of throwing that love interest in, we could have focused on the found family with Renee and Valentina instead of this love interest, whose name I quite literally can't remember. None of it was interesting. I had to force myself to finish, and I have a couple of lines highlighted to indicate the terrible, terrible dialogue. So, he laughed. I, for one, like kissing you. I like you. Maybe a little more than like. Good, then it's settled. We like each other. I see no reason to keep our feelings a secret. What about you? Sorry, I didn't mean to insinuate anything rude. The first time I saw him, that impression came to mind, with his glasses and all. Pete, I'll remember that. These characters are in their 30s and over, or almost 30 and over. I just don't feel like that's realistic for how a 30-year-old would talk, and I gave the book 1 star. After I finished Fear Thy Neighbor, I moved on to Blood Sisters by Jane Corey. This is another thriller. It follows a different Allison main character and Kitty. Basically, we kick off 3 young girls start off to school one morning, and then within an hour, one of them is dead. 15 years after the accident, we have Kitty, who can't speak, doesn't have any memory of what happened. She's living out her life in a long-term care institute. She's deemed likely to never leave this institute. Somehow, she still sees a familiar face and becomes frightened when she sees the face. We have Allison, who is an art teacher, and she looks fine on the surface, but that surface is definitely a lie. She struggled to make ends meet throughout her life. She's desperate to forget her past, and so when a teaching job opens up at her local prison, she applies for it and miraculously takes the job, even though she is completely terrified of what's going to happen. After Allison starts working at the prison, she starts to receive these alarming notes and shortly thereafter her classroom is completely derailed by a crazy act of violence. Kitty and Allison spend this book being watched. Someone knows what happened to them on that day and they want revenge. Basically, we're trying to figure out what happened to the girls and also trying to figure out who is after them. So we have a book that is broken down into 3 different parts. The first part, we split perspective with Allison and Kitty, rotating points of view. Allison, we find out, blames herself for what happened, and really Kitty can't remember anything, but she does get flashes of what happened. Part 2, we're bouncing between present day Allison and Allison on the days leading up to the accident. Kitty's present, but she's a young girl around age 11 and kind of, you know, an asshole. And then in part 3, we're bouncing back and forth again between Kitty and Allison's points of view, but with Kitty remembering as time progresses more and more of what happened to her. I feel like this was such a good book. I was like gasping aloud during some points. There are things that happened that I didn't see coming, and at one point I definitely like screamed audibly. Jane Corey is gonna go on to my list of authors to read again because this was so good. Not quite a 5-star read for me, but close. 4 stars. I will say this, I would give content warnings for Blood Sisters. There is essay and self-harm in that book, so if you're not really prepared for that, don't pick that up. So after we finished up Blood Sisters, I was like, okay, let's take a break from the thrillers and cleanse our palate before we move into the books that he bought that are like horror-esque. And so we're gonna go with the romance, which was The Bet by Rachel Van Dyken. I have read other books from her, and she is not my favorite romance author, but I did not want to give him any help while he was picking out books, so I just was like, I've read a book by this author before, but that's fine. If you want to pick that up, we'll go with that. He said that he read the back and it sounded the most interesting to him. So we have 3 main characters, Jake, Travis, and Casey. Jake and Casey are childhood friends. It's been years since they've actually spoken to each other, so Jake mentions, hey, my grandma's really sick. You need to come home with me, pretend that we're engaged. And Casey's like, I'll do anything for your grandma, let's do it. So Casey's not counting on Travis, who is Jake's older brother, to be there, but you know, obviously he is because everybody's in town for sick grandma. So she has called Travis Satan for a reason, and she has never forgotten what that reason is. But it's not really clear to me why his relentless teasing is the cause for him being called Satan. They meet again. Travis's smile hits her directly in the heart, and Casey's left feeling more confused than ever before. Days pass. It's a Labor Day weekend. She kind of starts to realize, hey, maybe I shouldn't have accepted Jake's proposition. I read Elite by Rachel Van Dyken a few years ago. It was kind of a fun ride. It's a mafia romance. I read it because I thought that it was like the Netflix show Elite, but it's not. It's a mafia romance. And that was kind of my first foray into the mafia romance realm. This, I assumed, was going to follow suit, but I did not have any such luck. I would say it's a childhood enemies to lovers book, which should be my cup of tea because I do like a good enemies to lovers, but this just wasn't it. Writing, not great. Characters, not fully fleshed out. Here is a line that I literally cannot make up that was in this book, okay? Not to mention, well, the unmentionable parts that ladies were not supposed to mention. So when I read that, I was like, yeah, not really the writing for me. Dialogue was super weird in spots. I in no way found it believable that these were real people. One of the main characters was such a freaking terrible human. Struggled to believe that the female main character would like even be friends with him because he was just terrible. It felt very like pick me of her to be like, oh well, I'm friends with him. Oh, he's mean to you, but I'm friends with him. Tropes in this: childhood friends, enemies to lovers. I also really need to point out that one of my biggest qualms with this book was that the female main character, this is another reason why I'm like, oh, she was a pick-me. The female main character refers to Jake's female romantic partners as skanks constantly in this book, and I'm like, okay, it feels very much like a 14-year-old writing a book trying to be sexy. It wasn't a fun time. I did read it very quickly because the writing's easy. 1 star for me for Rachel Van Dyken's The Bet. After I finished The Bet, I picked up the horror books because we are finally into September, and then you know, with September I was like, let's start reading some creepy stuff. The first of the creepy books that I picked up was Gallows Hill by Darcy Coates. To be fair, this book, I saw it while we were perusing and I didn't pull it off the shelf and like read the back or anything, but I saw the spine and I was like, That sounds like something that I would gravitate towards. So we were standing in the horror section and he was like, I don't know what to get. And I was like, can I just show you what I would reach for? Pointed this out, he pulled it off, he read the back, and he bought it for me. And I will say, I am so glad that he did. Spoiler, this was probably the favorite of the books that I read that he picked out for me. It was very good. We have Gallows Hill by Darcy Coates. It is a horror novel. Gallows Hill follows our main character Margot, and it centers around Gallows Hill Winery, which has been in Margot's family for at least 11 generations. And the whole family, that's Margot's family name, has spent these generations both living and working the grounds on which the winery sits until Mr. and Mrs. Hull settle down one evening, and then by morning they are deceased. So Margot has to come back to her family home. It's been decades since she's been there. No one has any idea as to why Margot was sent away, but upon her parents' deaths, she obviously inherits the winery and doesn't really want anything to do with it because she's like, y'all sent me away. F this business, I'm gonna sell it. The winery itself is super valuable, but the problem is that the field that the winery was built upon is actually the site on which hundreds of convicts were hung in early years. And so the locals kind of whisper these rumors about the ground, saying that it's cursed. And as Margot spends more and more time there, she starts to think, you know what? They might be right. Let's talk about what I thought about this. So this is the first Darcy Coates book that I have read, and I will 100% be reading more. Horror is not my favorite genre, but this was perfect to me. It felt very gothic, and I really, really do love gothic novels. The whole concept super interesting to me. Haunted house, cursed grounds, and the backstory for the curse really had me like dialed in and hooked. This wasn't really as nightmare inducing as some horror novels can be. For me, it was more creepy than scary. There was a point where my neighbor's dog wandered into my front yard, and it was very, very hot, so I had, and my AC was broken. So I had my door open to let kind of a breeze at least circulate through, and my dog likes to sit over by the door and look out, which is fine, but the neighbor's dog wandered in, causing my dog to absolutely lose her mind and start like howling, which of course scared me to death because I was reading an intense part of the book when she started to do her barking. So that was really fun. It was a little slow to me at the start because we pick up at Margot's family's funeral and we have no idea. We're just kind of thrown in there. But as it progressed, I read this book in one day and found it to be very, very, very enjoyable. This was a 4-star read for me, so close to being a 5. So after I finished Gallows Hill, I went for the very last book that he picked for me. Inspection by Josh Malerman is marketed on Goodreads as a horror novel. I don't think so. I think from the moment that I picked it up, I was thinking this is dystopian, this is not horror. Nothing really truly scary happens in this book. So for me, not horror. Dystopian for sure. We follow a couple of different main characters. J is an alphabet boy. K is a letter girl. And then alongside them, we have D-A-D and M-O-M. So J and K are the main characters of this story. J is a student at a school hidden far away from civilization deep in the forest. He's one of 26 students at his school who view the founder of the school as their father, hence D-A-D. The boys at the school are J's peers, but essentially they are the only family that he's ever known, so I'm going to call them his brothers. The boys are sent to the school to become prodigies of like science. They are there to prove that genius cannot have any distractions. And so the school is literally all the boys have been able to know or been allowed to know. As Jay gets older and turns 12, we kind of see that he suspects that there's something else beyond the pines that surround his school. What does DAD not want them to know? Why are they still there? What's he hiding? What's the real purpose of the parenthood? Jay is questioning everything. Now on the other side of the forest, there is another school, but that school is for girls, and this is where Kay comes in. The girls are there to become basically prodigies of art and the arts. So Kay is the artist. Kay is asking the same questions as Jay. She wants to know, why are we kept here? What's the parenthood hiding from us? Jay's never seen a girl before. In fact, he does not know that the opposite sex does exist, and the same is true for Kay. She's never seen a boy. She doesn't know that boys exist. They both begin to kind of investigate their strange schools, they're going to discover each other, and we kind of go from there. For me, again, another slow to start book, but the problem with this one is that there was a lot of world building in the beginning, and for me, that's not really something that I care to know. I'm like, hey, just throw me in there. I'll figure it out as we go along. So what I did for this is for the first part of this book, because this is another book that's broken down into parts. I borrowed the audiobook via Libby because it was available, and I listened to the first part while reading along just to help me power through it. And once we got past all of the world building, I began to be way more interested in what was happening in this book. I really wasn't interested too much in how this dystopian society came to be. Again, I would say this felt more dystopian, but not in the science fiction-y sense of dystopia. It is in fact, like I said, listed as a horror on Goodreads, but like I said, not really a horror to me. It's not scary. For me, it's kind of more of a gender bent Lord of the Flies, in that we have this society of children. There are adults like as part of the parenthood, but the children are basically running the show in this book. So gender bent Lord of the Flies with a supreme act of violence at the end, okay? I think that the concept of the two different schools, one for boys, one for girls, where neither know that the other exists, made for a super interesting concept for this society. I read another Malerman book, and I think that they're about on par with each other. I think that he has an interesting voice in writing, and like I said, once I got past that world building, I was able to enjoy myself. This book, not really something that I would say is for everybody to pick up, because like I said, the ending is absolutely brutal. Would have felt bad for the children, but DAD and MOM, which is of course the girl equivalent of DAD, these adults brought these children up in this society for 12 years. Their mental capacity truly is, in reading this, that of adults, just adults who are ignorant of the opposite sex. I fully believe at the end, and if you've read this, let me know what your thoughts are. I fully believe at the end that the children knew exactly what they were doing. This, like I said, on par with the last Malerman book that I read. I gave Bird Box 3 stars, I think. This is also a 3-star read for me. It was good. I would definitely read another Malerman book if it came down to it. So yeah, that is the last book that the hubby picked out for me. So that is it. I didn't pull any stat for the totals for this like I would for a wrap up, because I am going to do that when I get to my September wrap up. Overall, I think that he did a pretty good job. We only had 2 duds in the whole TBR that he built for me. So, you know, I'm pretty happy. I know when I was texting him talking about the books that I was reading, he was like, how was it? How was it? And he felt bad for the duds. But, you know, I don't even like all the books that I pick for myself. So I feel like he did an excellent job. Standouts, of course, Blood Sisters and Gallows Hill. Yeah, so definitely we'll be checking out more Jane Corey and Darcy Coates books in the future. But that's going to be it for me. If you've read any of these books, I would really, really, really love to know your thoughts. So go ahead and leave me a comment down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And I will see you next week with something fun.
You're going to see Mom in the future.
Bye. Oh my goodness, bless you.